I also remember that same age was the first age I was introduced to insecurity. Little boy on the playground. I had on these plaid pants I thought were amazing. I mean, it's 1975. Of course, plaid pants are amazing, right?
Hey, it's a comeback. They're awesome now too.
I know, bell bottoms, right? This little boy
Yes.
made fun of me. And it was the first time I really came in contact with someone saying to me that what you are or what you've done is not something I like. And I went on that playground that day and I went and hid behind a tree for the rest of the time. And I stopped singing on top of the slide. And so one of the questions I always ask women is I say, who were you before someone told you who you weren't?
Welcome to the Daron Earlewine podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Daron Earlewine.
Question of the week right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast. Who were you before someone told you who you weren't? Yeah, that's going to need to soak in for a minute. That's a big one. Welcome back to the Daron Earlewine podcast. Oh my gosh, crowd goes wild. We're back. It's a beautiful day. The day that we're recording this, we now have a new president and new vice president of the United States. And the vice president is the first woman ever to be elected vice president of the United States. And it doesn't matter really which side of the political aisle you fall on. That is a monumental moment for our country. And I celebrate that today as it's happened. And it's very apropos, I will say, that we're recording the podcast today that we're releasing with our guest, Heather Semple. And Heather is an amazing leader. I've known her for a good chunk of her life, great friends with her brother. She's actually like a college best friend of my wife, and she is an absolute world-class leader, and you are going to be blown away by her story today. And the quote I hit you with to start the episode is one that she is going to share in the interview, in this absolute life-changing moment that she goes back to see herself as a 4-year-old little girl. And I'm going to unpack that here in just a minute. And I know that many of you are going to be able to find your story in this moment when that sense of identity and confidence, that sense of joy was compromised for you. And my prayer is, as you listen to this episode this week, that it will be either your first step or for sure your next step in healing and reconciliation of that joy and of the dream that God's placed in you. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast in general. It means so much to us. I said this last week. I'm going to say it every week. We continue to see the numbers grow, and it means so much to us because we're not trying to. This isn't a numbers game. We don't get a plaque on the wall if we have more people download or the numbers go up. But it means that there are more people that are taking steps to be awakened, to become who God's created them to be. And so thanks for joining us on the podcast. Thanks for sharing it with friends. Thanks for those of you that have subscribed, whether it's on YouTube or here on any podcast channel, platform that you listen to the podcast. It makes a huge difference. And thank you for those that have taken the time to leave a review. It really means a lot to me. And listen, I keep encouraging you to do this because I don't want to just have this conversation be a one-way street. I want to encourage you to reach out to me. To email me, you can email me at Daron@blackbirdmission.com, or you can text me 317-550-5070. The text comes to me. You'll be texting me. It's not some, text number that goes to Cambodia or something. I get the text message in my back pocket, and I would love to communicate with you. We put this content out every single week, and we take a lot of time putting it together. Our team, Jen and Daron Cooper, they spend a lot of time on editing and making it look and sound great for you to be able to consume. But we don't want it just to be a one-way street where we send content into your life. We want it to be a two-way conversation. We want you to reach out to us. We want to know how the content is impacting you, what God's saying to you, what challenges are you having, what could help you take next steps, where are you getting stuck, where are there victories. Let us know stories that are happening where we can celebrate and say, oh my gosh, that's so awesome that you're taking steps, that you're seeing God open doors, and that you're walking in the joy of who He's created you to be. So please, please, please reach out to me. Would love to hear from you. Like I said, we're sitting down this week with Heather Semple. I know her as Heather Canan. That was her maiden name. And, some people have last names where their last name just becomes their first name, and that was Heather. So to everyone, she was just Canan. And she had an unusual journey into her calling. What she will say is I reflected with her upon one of the things we talked about back in the day. I think it was maybe in our episode with Steve Poe, where I said there are kind of four stages into stepping into our calling with God. And they are that we resist it initially, right? It's kind of the hero's journey, if you will, right? We resist it, then we negotiate with God, and then we wrestle with God. And then we get to the point where we either submit to who he's created us to be or we reject it. And we kind of stumble our way through life. And Heather says that most of her life was a huge wrestling match, a fight with God because she felt like she didn't fit anywhere. And one of the things she says is as growing up as a kid, it was kind of this question of, where do bossy little girls fit in? And you may be listening and saying, yeah, I've thought that. And I married one of those, right? And so I've seen this, I've lived it, is when you are a strong, opinionated, and not even just opinionated, you're a strong, confident leader and you're a woman, sometimes you don't know where you fit in life. And more sadly, I think a lot of times the world doesn't know what to do with you. And to grow up in a place where you don't know where you fit and you notice that the world doesn't know what to do with you can become a very isolating and very unsettling place. And Heather unpacks that in this interview. And if you've ever been there, this is going to be an interview that's going to unpack some stuff for you, because what Heather takes us back to very early in the interview is a moment where she felt what she says is a pure, unadulterated joy. A joy that what she didn't know, but it was a moment in childhood where the soul of her calling was being awakened. And obviously, as a 4-year-old, she didn't know to go, you know what? This feels so perfect in the depths of my being because this is something that God's called me to do. She didn't know that. She just looked back and thought, that was a moment. That was a moment where the seeds of my calling were birthed. They began to take root. And then she'll unpack for us that for years and years and years and years and years, she resisted, she fought. It seemed like a burden. It seemed like something to be rejected. And she'll take us back to a story of a comment made to her, and I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'll let her tell her story. But she asked this question in the interview, and I want you to marinate with this for a second before you hear her talk about it. Is who were you before someone told you who you weren't? Who were you before someone told you who you weren't? And I think we all have a moment there, right? Where as a kid, there was something that felt right, that brought about an unadulterated, unhindered, unhinged joy in us. And then someone told us that we couldn't sing, or someone told us that we couldn't write, or someone told us that we couldn't lead, or someone told us that we were too stupid or too ugly or too slow or too something. We were not enough. We weren't that. We couldn't be that. And the problem is we believed them. And now you may be at a place in life where you have uncovered that, you've been healed from that, and you can see in hindsight that happened. You may be listening right now and you feel like your life is in a spin cycle. You feel like you're not sure because there's nothing tethering your life to any truth. And so you feel whipped back and forth by circumstances, by emotions, by the opinions of other people, by your own depression, your own anxiety, whatever it may be. You feel completely unanchored, completely untethered in life. And maybe that's why you found the podcast. If it's so, you came to the right place. I'm so glad you're here, friend. But in Heather's story, what she's going to talk about is that what began to happen for her is that she began to see that moment as a tethering moment of joy. It began to lead her back into becoming who she was born to be. And joy is something that I want to get your mind around and your heart around. Then we're going to jump right into the video, because joy is something that I feel like we're like, well, that maybe is for kids, or I'm not sure when I really have an experience of joy. But here's the deal: when you step into who God's created you to be, and even if they're just for mere moments, you know that you are doing what God put you on earth to do. And that could be in any role. I'm not talking about a job. I'm talking about fulfilling your calling. And that could be done in any career. But you know that I am doing this. I was created to do this. I'm doing this amazingly. And something about what is happening right now in my life is making everything about me make sense. There is such a joy that comes from that is from God. The Word of God tells us this in 1 Chronicles 16:27, that splendor and majesty are before him, and strength and joy are in his dwelling place. Strength and joy are in the dwelling place of God. So when you step into a relationship with God, in that relationship with God and who he is and who he says you are because of who you are in him, that begins to tether your life. That is an anchor for you. It is an anchor and is a tether to the identity of God, of who he is. And when you're able to be in his presence, and the cool part about it is when you step into a relationship with Jesus Christ, and as we talked about in spiritual DNA, Second Peter 1 tells us, right, that we can actually participate in the divine nature. We're given everything we need to live and to serve God, and we participate in his nature. So when God is within us, we become his dwelling place. Then the tethers and the anchors of our life are strength and joy. So as you're following and taking steps to become who you're born to be, the way that you're tethered, the way that you're guided, the way that you're able to stay on course is by following strength and joy. And so do you know in your life what brings you the greatest joy? If you're not pursuing that, you may be leaving your life untethered. Nehemiah 8:10 also tells us that the joy of the Lord is our strength. So I want you to think as you jump into this interview with Heather Semple, is who were you before someone told you who you weren't? And do you know what brings you pure, unadulterated joy in life? Because the joy of the Lord is your strength, and in his dwelling place are strength and joy. And if you're going to get back to a place of understanding who you really are outside of people's opinions or thoughts of you, of past failures or mistakes, it's going to be tethering yourself to the presence of God, to the joy of God, to the strength of God that's going to get you up and out of that pit into a place of unadulterated joy and strength. As you don't let someone else tell you who you aren't, let you bet your life on everything of who God says you are. Heather's going to take us on that journey. Let's get right to it. Right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast, I interview the phenomenal leader, great woman of God, Heather Semple. Here it is. Hey, excited to sit down today with my good friend Heather Semple. And Heather is a pastor. She's an apostle. She's an extraordinary person. She's actually my wife's person. I know if you ladies out there, you know you've got like a person. They're your person. And even though we're separated by hundreds and hundreds of miles, Heather is my wife's person from back in the day. Heather, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Daron Earlewine podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Julie is my person.
Yes.
She will always be my person.
She's so jealous right now that I'm actually talking to you, and she's not.
I've been able to talk to you. I've been able to see you talk to you twice.
I know.
Last month, and she and I, text or things like that, but we haven't been able to see each other for quite some time. So, I'm just, I feel like maybe you're by proxy.
That's it. That's it.
Hang out with her.
She can at least download and watch this episode and feel like she got to hang out with you.
She's good. You did well. She's phenomenal.
She is good. She's amazing. So Heather, fill in the blanks. I know you. I know a little bit of your story. Give our listeners and our viewers just a little synopsis of who you are, what you're doing now, where you're at. Give us a quick snapshot of who Heather Semple is.
Yeah, I am married to Jeff. We've been married about 20 years, which seems like such a long time. I remember my parents were married for 20 years, and I thought they were elderly. And I was like, what the heck? So here we're like married for 20 years. We've got 3 kids. I've got a daughter that's graduating from high school.
Wow.
And we've got a freshman daughter and then a little 4th grade boy. We live north side of Atlanta. I work at 12 Stone Church. I'm a pastor on staff here. My husband, we moved here to work at 12 Stone 2.5 years ago, and Jeff also worked here, but then in January stepped out to begin his own design graphic web business. And so he's doing that. I'm still here on staff, one of the pastors, moved from Wisconsin, other side of the world, where I was a senior pastor, and Jeff did some creative things on staff there as well. Honestly, our entire marriage, Jeff's been in ministry. This is the first time he's not been in ministry, and I stepped into ministry late. And so there's been a lot of dynamics changes, in our life and circumstances over the years. This, my whole family is like, I don't know, like it's like the group of Levites in the Bible where literally like every person on my dad's side that's a male
Yeah.
was a pastor.
Mm.
And I came into it late, I came into it in my 30s. So, but yeah, we've been here 2.5 years. And of course, as God works in our lives most of the time, completely unexpected to,
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely love the South. Really love the metropolitan, love the diversity, love a lot of things about being down here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it's an interesting journey. I know a lot more of your journey, and I want to invite everybody into a little bit because it's fascinating. And a couple of things that I want to make sure we hit. One, you talked about that it is pretty phenomenal. You do come from the tribe of Levite or whatever, the whole like Canaan family, which is your maiden name. Pastors, all of them. Your brother's a good friend of mine. He's a pastor out in South Dakota, killing it out there. Your dad, it's everywhere. But what's intriguing, and we're going to get to, is that you just told us you just came from being a senior pastor of a church as a woman.
Yes.
There's going to be millions of Christians. They're going to be like, nope, not allowed, right? Which is a crazy statement to say millions. And then there are going to be millions of others that are going to go, oh, no, that's totally awesome. And then actually the crazy part is there's going to be other millions of Christians that are going to go, it's cool, but I don't like it. And so Yeah. And so you live in that stew, and I want to hit it because there's a lot of amazing female leaders, apostolic prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, the whole gamut that listen to the podcast, and they're gonna find themselves, and they're gonna find inspiration and comfort in your story, which we're gonna get into. But here's where I want to start, Heather. Is a couple months ago, we talked to a great pastor here in town, Steve Poe, and as we dug into Steve's story, I kind of pulled out 4 points that I talked about that I feel like sometimes, or I would say most of the time, we go through in figuring out God's call in our life as we're trying to become who we were born to be. And I said that I feel like they're a process when we initially resist, then we begin to negotiate with God, as far as calling and how that looks. Then it usually gets down to a full-fledged wrestling match until finally we either submit or we kind of just get away and we walk away from it in general. And your journey from growing up in this kind of home to step into where you are now, that was not a straight and narrow path, was it?
No, it was not. I always say, if you could look at the resume of my life choices, here's like in black and white, there was just nothing, not one single thing that would have been on there prior to like age of 30 that would have suggested this is what I should be doing with my life.
Really?
Absolutely not. It's interesting when you talk about, those 4 words and what it means. And when it comes to calling and things like that, because the word that I would say I most associate with my journey is resistance. But probably a little nuanced in that I never recognized a calling on my life and resisted a calling. I resisted, I just fought and wrestled with the Lord a lot. And I would resist boxes that people wanted to put me in and that were typical to put a woman in. So the resistance and the wrestling was really about, I felt different than other women. I felt like my gifting wasn't the typical celebrated gifting of like, I played sports, but I wasn't the athlete, and, I wasn't the musician, and I wasn't the 4.0. Some of the things that people would give accolades for or praise a girl for were not what I was praised for. And so I just would resist and almost push against people and, labels. And I just didn't understand where I fit in. And so I kind of fought everything. I was just angry at the world, like, punching the air all the time. And so wrestling with God, I didn't have any idea where someone like me, who was the bossy little girl and who was often said, Heather, I don't know why you're such a fighter. Why are you such why are you so pushy? I did not know that that was actually something that God had put inside me that if channeled correctly and if developed correctly would be something that that he could really use for his kingdom. So I just resisted and wrestled with everybody and everything all the time because I just felt alone and vulnerable, and I didn't know where I fit. And so I felt like I never measured up because I was never what the typical girl was. So then you throw value issues into the mix, and you got value issues. So then you start chasing and going down roads in order to find value that actually strip value from you rather than add value. And so it just becomes a cacophony and a recipe for a lot of pain and frustration, which I think, honestly, I think I was called by God my whole life.
Mhm.
I can look back in retrospect when I was a little girl
Yeah.
and recognize some things.
Tell us
Um,
those stories. Tell us that.
yeah, I remember, I always tell women, I was like, I think every woman has like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old moment that we can go back to where we felt pure, unadulterated joy.
Mm.
Like I can go back to a memory of myself in the backyard of our house that happened to be a playground that was shared between our home and a daycare. And so when the kids were not in the daycare, were not playing in that playground, I would go out to the playground and I would stand on the top of this slide that at the time seemed 3 stories tall. And
Yeah.
it was like 5 feet tall. But in the day, I'm 3 years old. I'm out there standing on top of the swing, and I am like singing my heart out, and I'm like, um, teaching people. I'm talking to people that are not there in the yard, but I'm doing that on the top of this slide. And I remember it so vividly. And um, I also remember that same age was the first age I was introduced to insecurity. Little boy on the playground. I had on these plaid pants I thought were amazing. I mean, it's 1975. Of course, plaid pants are amazing, right?
Hey, it's a comeback. They're awesome now too.
I know, bell bottoms, right? This little boy
Yes.
made fun of me. And it was the first time I really came in contact with someone saying to me that what you are or what you've done is not something I like. And I went on that playground that day and I went and hid behind a tree for the rest of the time. And I stopped singing on top of the slide. And so one of the questions I always ask women is I say, who were you before someone told you who you weren't?
Ooh.
If you can go back to that moment that I think many people have, like, really search and go, when do I remember my first memory of like just pure joy of doing something that as a child, no insecurity, no questioning. You didn't wonder if anyone was going to like it or approve of it. You didn't care if you looked stupid. You just didn't care. And then when did it shift?
Mm.
Because I can look back at moments like that and I can see things in myself and recognize them. And so when I say I think I was called my whole life, I really do.
Yeah.
I just think that especially for women, there are things inside of girls that, especially in that day, were just not seen as strengths. And were just not seen as things, or there wasn't even a place for a woman to really utilize those kinds of things culturally.
Mm.
And so we found ourselves going down roads and choosing things to do with our life that, were going to give us a paycheck or that we could do well, but we still were incredibly unfulfilled in. And so I just wrestled and fought because I felt like the world and the church was fighting me. And I thought, well, you're not going to, tell me who I am or who I'm not. So I'm going to fight back and I'm going to do what I want to do. And so, I just made a lot of choices, trying to find the value and be loved
Yeah.
for who I thought I was, but I didn't think anyone else could see.
When you said, I mean, I'm still stuck back. I'm trying to process everything you're saying. I'm still stuck back on the quote of who were you? How did you say it? Who are
Yeah.
you before
Who were
someone told
you?
you who you weren't?
Yes. Who were you before someone told you who you weren't?
Oh
Uh,
gosh. I mean that
yeah.
I think in some ways that comes back to everyone's like childhood wound, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it depends on how deep that is. And I absolutely agree with you. I do. I mean, every week, I mean, that's the podcast is created to awaken people to become who they were born to be. And so, I believe through the bottom of my heart that it's created within your physical DNA and then brought to life by your spiritual DNA. So it it was in you. And I think that's interesting. And we don't get into to necessarily like spiritual warfare talks very often, but it almost feels like sometimes I notice that and everybody's calling is unique and it is meaningful. I'm not trying to put an A plus calling to in a a D calling, but I feel like that a lot of times people that may be marked for significant impact in their calling in what is placed within them early is the devil wants to come and begin to destroy and distort,
Yes.
pervert that calling early
Mhm.
to keep that train from rolling. And when you can look back and see that, standing on you need to write a book called Standing on the Slide in the Playground or something, right? It's like that's where you were like alive. And then it's the plaid pants. But as it goes, and what I think is fascinating, and what I want to just keep unpacking the story is for you, there's a whole world kind of feel. There's a church kind of deal. There's a God kind of deal. There's a whole family environment here. It like, and you said that. So the question I was going to ask is, what did it feel like as a young girl, teenager, to feel like I don't fit anywhere? And you said it was frustrating. It was vulnerable. It was, I mean, but take us there. You have this, but it's like I just feel like, what did it feel like to feel like I don't fit anywhere?
Yeah, I remember, of course, like you said, I grew up in the church.
Yeah.
So I grew up in youth groups and things like that. And I remember so clearly in high school, um, and my brother and I were in high school at the same time for a year. So he was a freshman, I was a senior. And I remember seeing my youth pastor gather up several of the guys in the youth group, my brother being one of them, and they sort of became this posse that was poured into and invested into and developed and called upon as leaders.
Mm.
And um, and I kept thinking to myself, there was this thing inside of me that always thought, I want to be chosen. I want to be chosen because I think that I could do that. I think I could, there are things in me that I think I would want to do. But, you know, that time, and I don't think it's just that time, I still think it's this way today.
Mm.
Um, Girls and women are so over sexualized that there was this teaching in the ministry world that if you're a man and in leadership, you have to stay away from women. Because if you get near a woman, well, oh my goodness, you might trip over yourself and fall into bed. And like, you can't be near a woman. So we have this like generations of girls, and I was one of them, coming up through the ranks of the church, but held at arm's length. And when men were the ones in positions of leadership, holding these girls at arm's length, I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And so no one was calling out the gifts. And I want to be careful because I don't blame like the youth pastors. I don't blame people and think it's all their fault. Um, I just I just look at the landscape of the church and think, um, we've let so much fear affect,
Mm.
you know,
Yes.
the things I think that God wants to do, like you talk about the apostolic leadership and all. We have men and women that God has called and gifted, and they just don't know it because someone's got to call it out in them. And for me as a girl, where there was so much fear of just, you know, being based on over sexualization and all of the things that leaders and pastors are told in the church.
Well, do you think it's worse too, Heather? Because I feel like it's even like if you're a strong, powerful, attractive, curvaceous, or whatever, like if you fit any of those categories, now you're scarier, right?
Oh,
Because it's like
sure.
we're like those are just attributes. Some of them, even great benefits. Where like if a guy saw a tall, dark, handsome, strong, strapping man, he'd be like, this guy's going to be a leader, man. We got to get this guy in here. But it's like, here's a gorgeous, curvaceous girl. Hey, guys, listen, we can't hang around her by ourselves because you know the deal. I mean,
Yes. And so, I just think it's such a shame. And
mm,
I think that what has happened is we've placed the burden of purity on the shoulders of women um, in the church. And so, we see pastors fall. Of course we do. Um, it always hits the headlines and things like that. But I think, it's not because they discipled a woman. There were other issues and it goes deeper.
mm,
And it's not because they opened a door of opportunity for her to step into a leadership role. And then it was because of that these poor decisions were made. There's so much more complexity to it. And I think there can be healthy ways to do it. But I definitely think that God has had his hand on my life, my whole life.
mhm.
I think he's protected me from so many things when I was choosing things that really should have taken me out. Like I do think the enemy has been shooting arrows at a bullseye on my back from those days of
Yeah,
singing on the side.
yeah.
And um, but he protected me because he had a plan for me. And it was just going to take me longer to get there. But you know what, Darren, like women weren't leading
Yeah.
when I was growing up. Like I didn't see them. No one said anything to me about being one. Like it just wasn't in people's sphere of thinking. I don't even think it was malicious. It was just not a reality. And nobody was really talking about it.
It's like it was structured to have to one of the phrases I've used often on the podcast is like there's so often people struggle with a deficit of imagination. Like it's not that they wouldn't want to do what God's called them to do, but they just can't even imagine it. And in your context, it's bigger than just like, a job thing. It's like you're saying that in the world, there wasn't even women that you would watch and go,
Yeah.
that inspires me. I want to be like that. She is changing my imagination.
In fact, the first woman I ever saw do something on a stage in a church was the moment it all changed for me.
Tell us that story.
We were, there's two distinct moments of seeing a woman on a stage. The first one was Jeff was a youth pastor in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And when we were first married, and there was a woman on staff that was a pastor at this church. And she would often be on stage and speak or be doing something or be leading something. And she and I got connected. And it was she really poured into my life. And she was the first woman I'd ever seen publicly and visibly lead in the church. And it changed everything for me. And she asked me one day if I would give my testimony in front of the church. And I had never done that before. I had never been on a stage talking into a mic at a church about my story. And
How old are you at this point, Heather?
25.
Holy buckets. So all of the gifts, the abilities, the strength, like I don't want to jump ahead too far in the story, but like you went and became a senior pastor in Wisconsin, right?
Yes.
And like grew a church to like over 1,000 people. Like you, like if people have met you in the past like 5 or so years, are like, Heather, she's like bomb digs. Like she's an amazing speaker, leader, whatever. You're talking about you're 25 years old and you haven't been on stage yet?
No.
All right. Sorry.
I've been teaching elementary students in a classroom. That was my job. That's what I did when I graduated from college. And that's what I did. And so this woman asked me if I would do that. I'd never done that before. And so one Sunday morning, I'm in this church and I get the mic. They tell me I have like 3 minutes. And so I really thought it through and I was like, here's what I want to say. And here's how I'm going to say it. And I went up there and I remember I never felt a nerve. I never like thought anything. I walked up there, they gave me the mic and I did it.
All of a
And
sudden, you were standing on top of the slide in third
yes,
in the
and
backyard again.
I remember that that was the first moment
Mm.
um, I'd ever had, other than the moment before someone told me who I wasn't, that there was a joy in me that um, I had resigned myself to never experiencing this side of heaven. I thought that because of my choices in my life and my job that I could do and was really good at, but did not find fulfilling, um, I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. And someday in heaven, I'm going to get to really, really have that profound kind of joy that I see in other people. But until then, this is just what I'm going to do. Um, and I had such a, like a moment. And she came out to me and she didn't realize either. Like she came out to me afterward and she was like, uh, so we need to talk about this,
Yeah.
you know? And it would still be, it would still be some years. Actually, that's not true. Um, it would be that year that I surrendered, when you talk about surrendered, to a call to
Mm.
ministry.
Mm.
That year, I surrendered and I knew that I like part of it's my temperament. Like once I know that I know, like that's it. There's no waffling. And I knew that I knew that I knew. It would still be a few years before I would enter sort of the preparation process and like actually getting into ministry. And that's a whole separate part of our story of just marriage imploding and things like that, that became part of Jeff and I's story and redemption and restoration, things like that, that would delay some of that for me. Um, but that was the year I did that moment. And then in my living room one day on the floor having my time with the Lord, doing my devotions, I was in Isaiah and I read Isaiah 61. And this is how I know that burning bush moments are real.
Mm.
Like God is so kind to do this. He doesn't do this all the time. I wish he would. And I find that this is rare where, you just have like, I have like a handful of moments in my life where it was just, I just knew God spoke to me.
Mm.
Like in my mind, like in my head, in my heart,
Yeah.
not audibly, but in my head, in my heart, I knew God had just given me a directive.
Yeah.
And I knew that when I read Isaiah 61 that day, and God said, this is your life. This is your life for the rest of your life. You're doing this. This is your new career. And I knew that I knew that I knew. And it was like when I knew that, it just, there was such like a pressure valve relief of like, there's so much to it, of realizing like, oh, like this is why I've wrestled for so many years. This is why I resisted for so many years. This is why. And all of that began to make sense. And this is why I always felt different. This is why my gifting was never really the typical, you know. This is why I enjoyed franchising my lemonade stands when I was 8 years old. Like this is, you know what I'm saying? Like
What are
this
some
is
of the parts? What are some of the parts, Heather, and that for somebody that's like Isaiah 61? I don't know that. I don't know by heart either. What are some of the words that jumped off the page in that passage?
Isaiah 61 is when the prophet named Isaiah is saying and describing what Jesus came to do. And it would be those words that Jesus in the New Testament, it would be the first um, thing that Jesus did to declare what he came to do. He would open the scroll and read it in the synagogue. And, it says he came to bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim freedom for the captives, bestow beauty for ashes, turn mourning into dancing. This whole list of things that Jesus, the Messiah, was coming to do. And then in the New Testament, Jesus would crack open that scroll in that synagogue, and all of the religious leaders' jaws would hit the floor as he read and said, I am going to bind up the broken heart. I'm going to heal people. I'm going to set people free. I'm going to do all these things. And I read Isaiah 61 and it was like something leapt up in my heart. And all of the things that I feel so passionate and compassionate about the brokenhearted and the people in chains and the people in mourning and the people in sorrow and the people captive to sin. Um, I knew that God was saying to me, I'm inviting you to be a part of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I knew that I knew. And um, things began to make a lot more sense.
Heather, what I talk about this a lot, and it's the reason that I'm so passionate about spiritual DNA. It's the reason I'm so passionate about doing this podcast, and why I've dedicated my life to this message is because when we have an I make sense moment,
Wow. Yes.
nothing else can compare with that. And it's, a more flowery way to say it is an awakening, but it comes down to that where you make sense. And then it's from where I've been to where I'm at to where I'm going, and to realize that the reason I love spiritual DNA is to help people get some handles on, like, not only do I make sense, but I have been created on purpose and for purpose in this tuning fork of the soul that's going off right now. Is I actually have abilities and strengths and a personality. I have been actually created to do this thing well that's bringing me to life. And you discovered that, you stepped into that moment. And I love the fact that you're saying that it's like that it was at that point that you heard the call. But the interesting thing is, and what I want to hit here is that some of the you had this I make sense moment,
Mhm.
but much of the I still kind of don't fit in the world was still in existence, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, but I think that's when we have to let things really tether us because,
Hmm.
um, maybe part of my DNA is I rarely think I just don't see obstacles.
Yeah.
I just think, yeah, I'll do this.
Mhm.
I'll figure this out. And so, um, I didn't realize all of the obstacles that would exist. Everything from, Jeff and I were both going to be in ministry. Well, then, where's that going to happen? Where somebody's going to want us both,
Mhm.
and we experienced where they would want him. And I was sort of this add on they had to take, and so it wasn't that you have this moment where you go, I make sense. By the way, that's brilliant. Like, that's the best way to say it. When you have the moment where you suddenly go, oh my gosh, I make sense. Like,
Mm.
who I am makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to steal that because that's so good, Darren. Like, but that doesn't mean God is kind and that he gives you have that moment, but that doesn't mean that everything just like the pavement like begins to lay out before you.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a there's been a journey since then. And um
But I don't think, Heather, if you don't have the moment where you make sense, I don't think you have what it takes to make it all the way through the journey. Because then, even when it was, when the challenges come, even when the pavement's unsteady, even when there's blow ups in life, it's at that point. I mean, I think that's why it's so foundational, is because you at least knew internally from the depths of the soul, I know that I make sense. I know that I'm loved by God. I know that he's for me in this. So I now have the resolve. I now have what it takes to persevere through what's coming at me.
yes, it tethers you and it has to.
Yeah, yeah.
You and too many people choose they let the things that they know that they know that they know suddenly become vague and gray when hard things hit. And God never changed what he told you. Um, it is the tethering of that can carry you. And you're so right about that. That presses you like push forward, push through this. You can get through this because God has a plan for you. And this is what you're seeing around you. It's not that because here's the thing, like just because I make sense to me, well, I don't make sense to a lot of people. And so like you're gonna come up against I still come up against people that I make no sense to. And so if I'm not sure
Mm.
of who I am, it's
Yeah.
easy to hear the like chorus of voices that's like, this doesn't make sense and you don't make sense and we don't get it. And we think you should be more this way and in that way. And go, oh, maybe I should. But no, like, okay, I'm gonna say something super cheesy. I don't know. I don't know if I'm ashamed to say it because it's so cheesy, but it's
I'll
true.
let you know.
There's like there's like a clip in The Lion King
Yeah.
The like the original one where like the monkey takes the lion over to look into his reflection.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, and is saying, "Hey, remember who you are." And he's like saying, I don't remember, who I am. And he's like, "Remember who you are. Look at your reflection of what you once were." And um, I just think no matter what your calling is, no matter what God's asked you to do, and it just doesn't matter. Like he made you to be you. He wants you. He asked you. And so to remember who you are, when the world wants to tell you who you're not and will continue to do so. Um, I don't know how you can be tethered if you don't cling to that. Like, I just don't know how you can sustain your soul and your spirit, like through this life without the anchors of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I say it's cheesy because it's a Lion King clip, you
No,
know?
there's so many amazing identity themes. I mean, that the whole Lion King is just like a massive identity theme movie. So it's not cheesy at all. It's killer. I love it. Well, you know what? I say this all the time with our guests. I'm like, we have to have you back because we never have enough time for the conversation I really want to have, and because we're trying to like encapsulate your entire life, right, in like 25 minutes. Here's the thing and we'll try to draw to a close, maybe, unless it gets too good, and we'll keep going.
Okay.
Is we can't go through the whole story, but you have different ministry things. There's marriage stuff. You get things. There's redemption. Then then you do get an opportunity to go be, a lead pastor at a church. And I mean, people are getting baptized by the dozens. I mean, it's like God's Spirit's going crazy. Like you're killing it. You're getting like national attention. I mean, from church leaders and stuff. I mean, you really found an amazing sweet spot. But the thing, and we can talk about that, but the thing that I kind of want to come back to, and I don't want to make it like sad or whatever, but I think this is important for people to hear, especially for whether it's men in leadership, it's women that are moving into leadership, and I don't care if it's in the church or if it's for AT&T. Is now I do think that the world is ahead of the church in this understanding, but you got a lot of momentum. You made sense to yourself. You begin to see God's blessing, but you're still realizing now, wait a second, I don't know that the church world is necessarily ready to celebrate and to motivate and to elevate strong women in leadership.
Yeah, it's and again, I mean, I think you have everything along the spectrum. I think you've of course got places and spaces that are just diametrically opposed. Of course, my belief is that their interpretation of the Bible is just wrong and honestly sinful. But so you have like the extreme version that it does get malicious and it does get judging. But I think by and large, many places it's just never been a reality. And so when you have lived a certain way and led a certain way with men in all the positions leading the way, like you just do what's comfortable.
Hmm.
You just do what you've always done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I still think there's a fear. I still think there's over sexualization of women. I still think the issues and problems that get cited as well, that there aren't women that are good enough, or there aren't women, there aren't enough out there that are of the caliber. But I think that all goes back to the cycles of like how we develop women and the opportunities that we give them, and our willingness to put in a woman who's highly gifted but slightly underdeveloped, and be willing to put the time in to develop her, to help stop this perpetual cycle of letting the status quo continuing to go as it is.
Mm.
But for me, like, this isn't about like some political thing or some like, oh yeah, men and women, women can do anything men can do. this is not at all what I think. I actually think men and women are distinctly unique in their makeup and spiritual DNA and leadership styles.
Yeah.
And I think when God in Genesis said man alone is not good, and it created woman, I think if you don't have both,
Yeah.
you have a fractured image of God. And so when you take the bride of Christ and you only allow half of humanity rather than the completion of humanity to lead, that when it says men and women were created in God's image, you are sacrificing the flourishing of the church by not letting the completion of God's image be represented.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, well, you could tell it runs deep, but I pray for the church because I so desperately believe that men and women together is what it's going to take. And like you said, the world's starting to get this. Like they're, women CEOs and, the church, there are areas and pockets that are coming along. But, it's of course slower than I'd like, but that's typically the case.
Yeah. Yeah. How about we end it with this, Heather? You have 2 daughters.
Yeah.
They're both stunningly gorgeous, intelligent, strong. They have a future ahead of them. They have a calling ahead of them. They're working that out. As their mom, as an apostolic leader, as a leader in the church, where's your mother's heart for the future for your daughters?
Yeah. I've always wanted my girls to see that the only limits to what can be done in and through their lives are the ones that God would place. So that like God can do anything he wants to do with anybody. And that they, like if you were to ask my girls, like they just don't see limits for women or men. And they think that it requires both. And they, my oldest especially, she's a senior in high school and she gets really upset and she sort of dismisses things in places when she doesn't see women leading. And because it's just been such a part of who they've known me to be and what we've known our life to be. And so that's something I'm so proud of and excited for them, that they've grown up in a home where the only limits will be probably themselves by, not saying yes to the Lord or by whatever, or just, if God says go here, not here, here, not here. So, of course, I dream of a day that, there aren't glass ceilings and that there aren't, the kinds of obstacles that currently exist. And my hope is they would not encounter some of the things that I've seen or encountered, but they might.
Yeah.
But I always think if my girls can leave my house knowing, I would rather them be a poor student, not have trophies, but know who they are, than to have a lot of accolades, but then get out into the world and have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have great hopes for them and, but I'm one thing done well. There's so much we failed at in parenting, but one thing we've done well is, really helped them understand that like, there's no limit to what God can do with you, and to imagine and to dream and to hope and try to call out their gifting and teach them to think, So,
well, it makes me think of, when Peter stands up and preaches that first sermon, right? And says that this movement that's starting is going to be a movement of visionaries and dreamers.
Yeah.
And what I love that you've done, Heather, and you've created a paradigm shift for your family and your daughters, is you have now expanded the imagination of what is possible. And there will be others that come in and tell them, or have tried to tell them what they're not. But you know, you can take them back to those moments on the slide, right? And say, that's true of you. Like that's real, that the joy that you feel, and it's possible. And you know what, Lord willing, Heather, you have decades and decades and decades of life left on this earth. And my prayer and my hope and my vision is that you are going to continue to lead thousands of young and old women to begin to understand that there's a new imagination of what it means to walk with Jesus and create the future with him. And in doing that, my prayer is that you'll do what you're continuing to do for me, which is, even as a male, as a leader, to begin to shift my paradigm and my vision to make sure I'm seeing really through the eyes of Jesus what it looks like to co-lead and to walk into his design.
Yeah. Well, Darren, thank you for that. You've been such an encouragement, in my life, and I'm grateful. You know, um, I'm grateful that through Julie we've been able to form a friendship, and I think you give me hope, and you bring a light into the world that is so brave and so many people are so unwilling to do, and you risk and you choose to be you. Like when you go, like you choose to be Darren, and God blesses that and breathes on that. And I just am so honored to even be in this conversation with you, and love you and Julie. And I know someday maybe, we'll live close, and like we can figure out something awesome to do together, or that would be like my perfect ideal world.
That would be amazing. I'm going to speak it into being. It's going to be this studio right here pretty soon, come in 2021 at some point, maybe 2022. It's the Heather Semple podcast. You know what I mean? She's just igniting women to become what they were born to be. Boom. What's happening? We'll put a slide back here. You can stand on top of it, wear plaid pants. I don't care.
That would be hysterical. Wouldn't that be hysterical?
It would be amazing. Well,
Oh,
I just spoke it into being. There it is. Ta-da.
there it is. I'm in, man.
Heather, thank you so much. This is going to be one of those episodes that people got to play twice, maybe three times, because they got to try to soak in all the truth that you gave. And I can't wait to get the feedback from people and just know the impact it's going to have for a long time. So can't say thanks enough. I appreciate it, and can't wait till we can hang out in person.
Thanks, Darren.
And we're back. I'm telling you guys, if I were to offer a money back guarantee on what I say about the interviews and what you're going to actually take from them, I'm saying I've got all your money. I'm not giving any of it back, because I'm right on. When I say that this is going to be a phenomenal interview, it's a phenomenal interview. And I think most of the time, well, I don't know if it does what I say it's going to do, because I'm waiting on your email still, right? I need to know. So if I say this is what you're going to get from the interview, and you're like, holy crap, Darren was right, that's exactly what I got from the interview, that's the cue to jump on your computer or your phone, because it sends emails too, and you just write in the first little thing, you know how email works, Darren@blackbirdmission.com. And then the title can be, holy crap, Darren, you were right. That's it. That's all you have to do. If you want to get super above just summa cum laude, right, double tassel graduate of the podcast, then you put in a body of the email exactly why I was right and how the interview blew your mind. That's just how it works, right? But I told you with Heather it was going to happen. Goodness gracious. I think this podcast right here is going to unleash a whole wave of women entrepreneurs, pioneers, leaders in the church. Let's go, right? As Bono would say, right? The future's female, and I think he may be right on this one. It's some beautiful stuff. And here's the deal. I told you to think about that, right? And you're gonna need to dig into it for a while, because if you got blank, if the cursor's just it's blinking at you, and when I said who were you before someone told you who you weren't, if you're like I got nothing, then there needs to be some time where you embrace some solitude, some stillness, some silence, and ask God to bring you back to these moments. God, where were the moments where the enemy of my soul, where the devil, where he began to attack my joy? And that might be a little bit of a scary journey. I'm going to be honest with you, but it's worth it because there's no valley of the shadow of death that our good shepherd, that God won't walk with us into. And there's nothing that he can't heal. There's nothing he can't redeem. Maybe you get to a place where you're like, there's some pretty dark stuff that I've not dealt with. There's one I want to encourage you to do. One of our partners in this journey is Davey Blackburn and his ministry, Nothing is Wasted. And Davey has an amazing course, the Pain to Purpose course, where he helps you deal with specific kinds of trauma and pain in your life. And so if you look back and you go, I know exactly where my joy was lost. I know exactly what happened. I knew who I wanted to be. I knew what God was doing in my life. But then here's the event or the relationship or whatever it may be where the voices in my head were spiritual voices and where physical people began to tell me who I wasn't. And you've never dealt with that trauma. I want to encourage you to go right now to the Nothing is Wasted website, Davey Blackburn, and I want you to purchase his course called the Pain to Purpose course. I think it's a 12-week course. You go on, it's an online course. He has great course guides that can take you through it and deal with that trauma. Allow God to bring healing into your life, because here's the deal. God has more for you. And I love what Heather said in there, where she was talking about that pain of in high school and seeing all the cool and hip guys being chosen for leadership. And she says, I wanted to be chosen. And that's true for every one of us, guys, isn't it? I mean, all of us can think back to some moment in like PE class, right, in elementary, where they're like, they chose captains, and they went. And then if you were ever the last kid to be chosen, is that not the worst thing ever? You're like, are my kickball skills really that terrible? I mean, it's kickball, friends, right? But they're like, Billy, but Stacy, blah, blah. And they get done. You're the one person like, I guess we'll take Daron. It's like, but it's serious, right? I'm not joking. I'll give you the laugh track just because. But it's tough. Kickball's a serious situation. But you could have a moment where you've just felt like you've never been chosen. And you need that. And you do need that because you were created for it. And here's the cool thing. It's already happened. It's already happened. The fact that you're on earth, the fact that you're listening to the podcast and breathing air means that you are created on purpose and for purpose, that God chose to create you. We don't need to go into the biology of it, right? But there were a couple million sperms going on in the situation, and somehow yours made it through and was the winning sperm in the situation. If you're under the age of 12 and you listen to the podcast, you're like, Mom, what sperm? I doubt we have any 9-year-olds listening. You know the deal. More laugh tracks, okay? It's a PG-13 podcast. Listen, you made it through, which means you were created on purpose. God chose you. You have been chosen for a purpose, and it's time to start living a life worthy of your calling. It's time for you to believe who God says you are above what anybody else has said, and you need to have an Isaiah 61 moment. And I want to read this for you as we close out today. As Heather talked about that moment where she was sitting in her living room and started reading Isaiah 61, and she said, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And the reality about the scripture is this doesn't say you're going to be a preacher. This doesn't say you're going to work in the church, but this is the essence of Jesus' calling that he put forth and said, this is what I'm about. And here's the deal. If we're trying to follow God and become what God's created us to be, our life is going to be a reflection of the life of Jesus. And so listen to these words. You who have been chosen by God to do good works, which he's prepared in advance for you to do. Isaiah 61. May this be your Isaiah 61 moment. The mighty spirit of Lord Yahweh is wrapped around me because Yahweh has anointed me as a messenger to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to heal the wounds of the brokenhearted, to tell captives you are free, and to tell prisoners, be free from your darkness. I am sent to announce a new season of Yahweh's grace and a time of God's recompensance of his enemies, to comfort all who are in sorrow, to strengthen those crushed by despair, who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful bouquet in the place of ashes, the oil of bliss instead of tears, the mantle of joyous praise instead of the spirit of heaviness. Because of this, they will be known as mighty oaks of righteousness, planted by Yahweh, a living display of his glory. This is true about you, friend. It says they will restore ruins from long ago and rebuild what was long devastated. They will renew ruined cities and the desolations of past generations. God wants to restore. He wants to rebuild. He wants to renew what is broken in your life. Foreigners will be appointed to shepherd your many flocks. Strangers will cultivate your fields and tend your vines. Then it talks about this. Listen to this. This is what's true about you, friend. You are chosen by God, and this is what is true. You will be known as priests of Yahweh and called servants of God. You will feast on the wealth of nations and revel in their riches. Because you received a double dose of shame and dishonor, you will inherit a double portion of endless joy and everlasting bliss. That's true for you, friend. If you've received a double dose of shame, of dishonor, here's what God wants to do in your life. You're chosen. This is what he's saying. You're going to inherit a double portion of endless joy and everlasting bliss. Receive that, friend. I pray it over you today. I speak that it is true over you because of who God is and who you are in him. Recover, restore who he's created you to be, and don't listen to those other voices. Step into your calling as you inherit a double portion of endless joy and everlasting bliss. I love it. I hope you're as fired up as I am with this episode. Go be it. Go do it. Go create it. Gosh, it's so good. Love to hear from you. It's a joy to be with you. Until we talk again, these three things. God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far from you. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. Until next time, right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast. God bless you guys. Love you.